How's everyone doing this morning? Excellent, man. There was some good-looking people here this morning. Man, some weeks, but this week, you guys are looking good today. It's so good to see you guys this morning. We're continuing our series, week 2, in decisions. And what that means is you have to make a decision. It's up to you to decide to do these things that Jesus is asking us to do. I think one of the hardest parts of ministry is people. I know I've heard people say before, ministry would be so much easier if it wasn't for all the people. And then we said that about different things in life. Life would just be so much easier if it just weren't for all the people. But that is not true. It is not true we say that because life is people. It's us doing it together. I know that there are some people who rub us the wrong way. If I ask you, raise your hand if someone irritates you, everyone would raise their hand. There are people who irritate us. Some people just walk into the room and they smile at us and they say, hey, how are you doing? And you think, oh, that person aggravates me. People like this. When I was younger and I had a short temper and I said more mean things than I do now and more inappropriate things than I do now, I told this person that I worked with that every time that she walked into the room, she just sucked the life out of me. What a terrible thing to say to somebody. It was awful, just terrible. I was a horrible person that day, but I did apologize to them. But we feel that way, and some people say stupid things like me toward people like that. So what is it that makes us put up so many walls toward other people? What makes us avoid people? What is it about people that causes us to avoid relationships with them so many times? I know people who rarely spend any time with other people. They rarely do anything with someone else, especially outside of work. They work with people all day. They go home, and that's kind of about it. They just go home and they stay at home. I know people who say they love the Lord. They say they love the church. They serve in certain ways, but they just live their life kind of as hermits. They don't really go and do anything with people. It was bizarre when me and Teresa first moved back here from Chicago years ago, and we moved into this cul-de-sac neighborhood. And we had friends in Chicago, and we knew our neighbors up there. But when we moved here, we moved into this little cul-de-sac neighborhood up in Huntersville. Every house looks the same. My house was 12 feet from my neighbor's house, and I know because I measured it. I'm weird like that. But it was a long time before we met our neighbors. How is that possible? We live right there beside of them. We didn't meet them by them coming over and knocking on our door and saying, hey, glad you're here. We didn't meet them like that. We met them out in the street when our kids were playing, and it took several months. But once we got to know everybody and build relationships, we had great friends. We still have friendships with all of them. In fact, I was in the parking lot of Lowe's this week and saw one of my ex-neighbors and walked over and stood and talked to her for a long time. I mean, even though there was some mild conflict along the way, we got it all worked out with the neighbors. It all worked itself out. But if there's no conflict, and once we got to know everyone and hanging out with them and we made these lasting friendships, what is it that made the neighbors and us avoid each other for so long? Why is that? I think it's because relationships are scary, aren't they? And relationships are a lot of work. They take a lot of time, but we need them. We need relationships with other people. You can't really live without them, and once you get them, you treasure them and you value those relationships, but it's scary and it's a lot of work initially. I was on staff at a church one time. I was actually in the staff meeting, and we were talking about building teams and how we were going to do that better. That's what I thought we were going to talk about. And several of the ladies, the administrative ladies, just said, I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to build a team, and it's just easier for me to do it all by myself. And of course, me being the team builder, I was about to go crazy in my seat because I thought, how can you say that? How can you be in ministry and not want to build teams of people? But I told them, I said, you're limiting your entire work in ministry around just you. It's just you and yourself. And if you'll start building a team, things will start growing for you. And right now, you can do it easier by yourself. But if you get a quality team around you, as we see around here in our church, we can't exist without volunteers and teams and stuff. What will happen is they'll be able to do things you can't do. And at some point, you won't be able to do what they're doing. It'll outgrow you. Well, the pastor of this church, he just sat there, and he didn't really say very much of anything because he didn't build too many teams or relationships either, and it really bothered me. So why do we, even in ministry, avoid these relationships with people and team building and being part of stuff, you know? How do we let God change our heart so that we see others the way he sees them? And then we're drawn to other people and we don't try to avoid them at all costs. How are we going to do that? How do you do that? How do we change a heart to look at people? So what will it take for us to change? What will it take for us to say, you know, I'm going to stop telling so many people, I just don't have time, I'm too busy, and what we're saying is I don't have time for you. I'm just too busy for this relationship. Well, I don't think we have to look any further than Jesus for the answer. So I'm going to dissect today a conversation that's pretty extraordinary, actually, when you look at it, that Jesus had with the Pharisees. And he is again in this conversation being approached by the religious leaders. If you don't know the story about Jesus and the religious leaders, they hated him. They're the ones who ended up crucifying him and sending him away. And what they want to do is they want to try to bring him down in this conversation. They're trying to bring Jesus down to their level. But the problem is you can't bring God down to your level. The only way that you can get God down to your level is he voluntarily comes down to our level in order to change our hearts. You don't bring him to your level so you can change his heart. It doesn't happen. So here's what happens. Matthew 22, verse 34, and we're going to put it on the screen up here, through 40. And if you have your Bibles, you can read along. But it says this, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, that's funny, right? He just had a conversation with them. He shut them up. They gathered together because they thought, well, hey, we'll take care of this. And one of them, a lawyer, smart guy, he asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said, this is Jesus, he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Now, it was interesting, a few things in here, that he calls him teacher. He says, teacher, verse 36, which is the greatest commandment. Now, the Pharisees were called the teachers of the law. So what he's trying to say here is, we're all teachers. You're not really a teacher. He's being sarcastic. Ha, ha, ha. Teacher, whatever. We're the smart ones, but I'm going to call you teacher to show everyone else here that you're not a teacher. He's kind of talking down to him. He's telling Jesus, you don't have an education, you haven't been trained, you haven't been to seminary, you don't know what you're talking about, so you explain it to me, teacher, because I'm the teacher. And then the one that's asking the question, he's a lawyer. So we have to understand that he understands the law. Maybe he's the smartest one there. And he would understood the law as it relates to Rome, the political law. That's why he was a lawyer. But he was a Pharisee, so then he would understood the law as it pertains to the Hebrew people, to the Bible. And when it's talking about the law in the Bible, what it means is the 10 Commandments. If you ever hear the law and you're not really sure what it's talking about, they're talking about the 10 Commandments of Moses. The teachers of the law are trying to understand here the law of Moses, and they're asking him about the 10 Commandments and what he thinks about that. So he's asking him this question to try to trick him and make him look bad. Look what it says, Matthew 22, verse 36. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Now, Jesus never gives the answer that you want. I promise you that. When you ask Jesus a question and you want him to give you the answer you want, he doesn't usually do that. He gives them two answers. He asks for one, but Jesus gives him two. And it's not just that. It's the answer that he gives at the end. It's sort of like the part in between. He says, tell me the one thing. And Jesus said, where's the one thing? But then there's the second thing. But what he says in between the two is pretty shocking, actually, if you look at it. Matthew 22, verse 37. And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Now, at this point of the conversation, everyone standing around, including us here, we're watching this today, if we were watching this in a movie or whatever, and we would be saying, yes. And the lawyer in this is probably reloading and getting ready to ask another difficult question to try to catch Jesus. And then he says this, verse 39. Verse 39, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Now, what happens here is this kind of blows everybody's mind that's in attendance, because Jesus said, what did he just say to him? The thing that got them is this little part right here where he says, and the second is like it. And I'm sure that Jesus' followers were thinking Jesus should have stopped while he was ahead. He should have just answered the one question and stopped talking right there. But he says, and the second is like it. So they're thinking, so you're getting ready to tell me that there is something that is on the level of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. You're telling me there's something that's like that? Jesus, what could possibly be more important? On the same level, equal to loving the Lord your God with all your heart. So Jesus changes the temperature in the room. What's the first and greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it. Now he has everybody's attention. So I'm wondering, does he have your attention? Because he's talking to us today. So Jesus is speaking to the crowds. He's speaking to the Pharisees. He has their complete attention when he says this. This is amazing. And here's how important this is. Think about this. Matthew wrote this down because he saw this interaction, and this story has made it unedited for 2,000 years, all the way down to us today. Does that get your attention? Are you paying attention? He's trying to get their attention and ours. Well, let me try to get another way to get you to pay attention to what Jesus says next to the Pharisees and why it's so important for us. And if you've missed it before when you've read this, I hope you can read it and see it today. See, the Pharisees, they think Jesus is marginal. He's not really that important. He seems like he's coming to importance, but we want to show the people Jesus is not really that important. His words, some of them are good, but let's don't listen to all of them. He's got some wisdom, but let's don't go too far. And what they want to do is for you to see that you can't trust Jesus. You can't trust everything he's saying. That's what the Pharisees are trying to do here. So when they ask him the question about the greatest commandment, the first part of his answer is easy to follow. It is. It's easy to follow this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. They're Jews, they're Hebrews, they understand the Ten Commandments, and they're with him on this part. Probably all of us in here today are also with him at this point. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. And it's easy to do that if you don't have an understanding of what that means. But that's okay if you don't understand what it means, because Jesus is getting ready to tell us exactly what that means, and he's going to show us. See, it's easy to love God with all your heart as believers today in America, on the terms that you think that phrase means. For them, it might have been a little bit harder, but still at the same time, they were Jews and they did this. It may have been kind of easy for them as well. Let me explain it this way. If I were to come to Bob today and I'd say, Bob, I'm going to roll a golden calf out here on the stage. Bob, I want you to worship the golden calf. What do you think Bob's going to say to me? No way. I love the Lord with all my heart. We'd say that. I love the Lord with all my heart. And then I look at Brian and I'd say, Brian, okay, I want you to worship your favorite political figure. Pick who that is. Pick your favorite political figure. There's a lot of worship of that going on, by the way, just so you know, all the way around. All right, then Brian would say, no way, I love the Lord with all my heart. That's easy. I can do that. I love the Lord with all. What if I told these two guys and I told you, I will pay you money to worship the calf, to worship the political figure, and you would say, no way, Jose. I love the Lord with all my heart. I wouldn't trade him for a golden cow. I wouldn't trade him for money. I wouldn't trade him for politics. No way. Love the Lord your God with all your heart on your terms is easy. It's not that hard. I would never bow down and worship anything in the place of God. I worship Jesus. That's what we do today. And I've been practicing this all week. Even in Spanish, it's Cuán hermosa su nombre es el nombre de Jesús mi rey. It's only taken me 7 days and hours to get that. What a beautiful name it is, the name of Jesus Christ, mi rey, my king. I can do that, easy. Whatever language you do it, it's still the same. I will do that. I'd never trade him for anything. I love him with all my heart, and I think most everybody in this room would say that. And everyone listening that day to Jesus were shaking their head in approval. Yes, we are there. And then Jesus goes right at the heart of the matter. which he always does. He always gets us to the heart of the matter of loving the Lord with all of our heart. Verse 39, and he says, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Now, when he says, and the second is like it, all the heads turn. And they all say, what did he just say? How can he say this? And he's got their attention, hopefully just like he's got ours today. He didn't say this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like the first. Don't have any other gods before me. Don't have any golden calves. Don't have any political figures. Don't have anything before me. He didn't say don't worship cows. He didn't say the second is like the first. Don't put anything before worshiping God, because we'd all say, yes, that's right, I got it. I'm going to do that. What he says is the second is like the first. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. That is proved when you love your neighbor as yourself. And I want you to listen to the words of this, and I want you to feel the weight of them, because you can't obey the one and not obey the other. They're connected. They're all together. If you aren't loving your neighbor as yourself, then you aren't loving God with all your heart. If you aren't loving your neighbor as yourself, then you are not loving God with all your heart. If you love your neighbor and you don't love God, then you're not really loving your neighbor, because God is love, and how can you love someone without loving them through God? If you don't love with the one who is love, you don't. There's no way to do these things inseparable. They're together. Yes, Jesus, I'm with you. I love the Lord with all my heart, my soul, and my mind. And then he says, and it's just like it. It's on the same level. It's equal to, you can't separate it, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's not what I thought he was going to say. I didn't think God was going to tell me that. I mean, people are hard to love. They irritate me. You know that guy lives beside me? You know that girl I work with? What are you talking about? That person stinks. You know he has a drinking problem. All of these things. How am I going to love? Well, you said you love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. And I want to see that because I'm saying you have to love your neighbor as yourself. They are together, or else he wouldn't have said it. If they asked him what's the greatest commandment and he gave them one commandment, then that would be the greatest commandment. But Jesus didn't say that. He said there's two, and he said the reason he said that is because it's important. They are connected, these two things. So here's why all the prophets, he even says, he takes it up another notch. Here's why all the prophets and all the law, they all hinge on this. It all matters to them. These two commandments are important to everything that you've ever known about the prophets and the law. Now, can you imagine the Pharisees listening to this? What is he talking about? Everything I've ever studied is about loving your neighbor as yourself. And the reason that we know that this is important to the law, and we know that it's important to all the prophets, is because the man who is sitting there saying it, and his name is Jesus, and he's saying, they're all talking about me, and I'm telling you, this is the point, these two things. Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus, who is the Son of God, says, love God and love others, because that's why I'm here, loving God and loving others. And I'm going to show you, and I'm going to prove to you my love for God, my heart for him, my mind and my soul committed to him, because I am going to love you with a love like you have never seen before, and lay my life down for every single one of you, putting my life on the altar. Jesus said there is no greater love than this, than what? Than a man lays down his life for his friend. And that's what Jesus did for us. So it's easy to say, I love the Lord with all my heart and soul and mind. I can keep that first part, but when it comes to loving others, then it gets very difficult for us. See, America is a very blessed place, is it not? We're very blessed here. We have so much, and there's so much opportunity for us, so much available to us. Even if you don't have it, you have means to get it, whatever it is in America. And so what happens is we become very individualistic. We can exist on our own. We can do life all by ourselves. It's not a great life. It's actually a terrible life, but you can do it. You can exist. You can run away, and the culture teaches you that. Run and hide. Stay away from those difficult relationships. Stay away. Isolate yourself. Put up the walls. See the flaws in others. If you hear of someone doing something wrong, even if it's not proven that they've actually done that, just stay away from them. Just eject them out of the conversation altogether, because it's not worth the risk. That's what our culture is teaching us. It's not worth the risk. And Jesus says, take the risk. Get involved. Get in the fight. Do something extraordinary. Lay your life down for somebody. Make a difference. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you cannot do that from the couch. You can't. You can't stay home and love the Lord with all your heart and soul and mind. It's not possible. Get in the game. Love your neighbor the way you love yourself, and love your neighbor the way you love God, and show them and the world that you love God with all your heart by loving them. I know most of you have heard about the shooting this week at UNCC. I have a professor friend who's over there. I texted him immediately, and he had a meeting off campus, and I know it's just been a mess over there. But what stood out? What's the thing that stood out? More people were having conversations about this same thing. You know what the headlines? I looked up some of the headlines. Here's some of the headlines from this week. Somebody need to answer that. Here's some of the headlines from this week. Charlotte shooting victim tackled the gunman. Charlotte shooting victim honored as a hero. Victim jumped on the gunman to save others. Student killed in the UNC shooting praised for fighting the gunman. His name was Riley Howell, if you didn't catch that this week. Here's what you need to know. He did something. He did something. It cost him his life, but he thought it's worth the risk. I'm going to do something. He laid down his life for those other kids, and he probably didn't even know all of them. And the ones he knew, he probably didn't even know them that well. And then I read those headlines, and then I think of what Jesus said. Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's why that stands out to us when we see someone put their life on the line for somebody else. Because it's extraordinary, isn't it? We don't see it very often. Why don't we see it? Christians should see it all the time with our friends in church. We're always laying our life down for them. That's what it should be like. And we talk a lot about loving others here. And that's what we're supposed to do. That's why we talk about it all the time at Mission City Church. It's because as followers of Jesus, we are called to love others. A church that doesn't love other people, that doesn't love our neighbor as ourselves, is not, I would say, a church that is devoted to Jesus Christ. And that's what he's saying here. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it. Don't miss this. Now's my opportunity to tell you. You want to know what loving the Lord with all your heart looks like? It means loving your neighbor. Jesus' words gives us two main things to pay attention to. Love God and love others. And worshiping him with all your heart. Don't let anything come between you and that, and the best way to prove it, loving your God, is to love your neighbor. Love God with all your heart is loving others. A friend once told me one time, he said, you know what? The best way for me to see that someone loves me is if they love my children. And those of us who have kids, we know that. If you want to prove your love to me, let me see you love my kids. That means something. And we call God Father, and he calls us his children. And I think it's similar in the same way. That the best way to show God, to prove your love for God, is to love his kids. We are all created by God. We are all valued by him. We are all important to God. We matter to him. And so therefore, we should all matter to one another. It's important to us. It should be. So I don't know if they're in the seats, if they're around, they're at the back. But this morning, and as we leave today, what I want you to do, same as next week, and we got a table with some information out there. I want you guys to sign up. I want you to start getting involved. If you're not involved around here, loving other people's in children's ministry, in the city groups on a Sunday morning, I go through all the ministries. There's a lot of different ways to get involved, and that's the first step in getting involved and loving other people. Get in the fight to save lives. That's what our church is trying to do, and you can't do that from the sidelines. One of the things that we talk about here with our volunteer ministry in our church is that we are not what we call a spectator model. And what that means is a spectator model is where everybody sits in the stands and they watch the professionals do all the work, like a football game. They get paid to play, and I'm just going to watch them do that. And a lot of churches are like that. We just pay people to do ministry, and we sit on the sidelines. We are not a spectator approach ministry here at Mission City. We are all getting involved. We're all serving because we say that serving is a little louder. Serving is a privilege. That's right. Say it like you mean it. Serving is a privilege. We get to do it. All right, let me leave you with this thought just to show you what I'm talking about. What if you came in this morning, you walked in the church, and I said, we've gotten some emails, and I've gotten some letters and stuff, some complaints from you guys, and so we're going to make a change. I know that you have said that taking communion is kind of difficult, and some of you don't really like touching the bread after somebody else has touched the bread, and you don't really want to dip it in the cup because someone else's, they kind of dipped in the cup, and I don't like walking up front the way we do it here, and it's a little uncomfortable for me, and we've heard what you have had to say about that, and what we've decided to do is we've hired some people to take communion for you. And we're going to call them our communioneers, okay? That's our staff position now. You guys can just sit back. You don't have to worry about it. Nobody has to bother with taking communion anymore. We've hired some people to do it. What will you think if I say that to you? You would think that we're stealing what? A privilege. We're taking something away that you want to do. It's something I get to do. Don't take that away from me. No one should take communion for me. I get to do it. And it's the same with loving other people. It's a privilege. You get to do it. Get involved, get on teams. Serve other people. If you say that you love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, then I'm saying I want you to get involved around here at our church and love some other people. And some of the concepts that I've been talking about today, some of these things about loving other people, we're going to continue talking about those for the next 4 weeks on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock at our high-impact volunteer training. This is probably, arguably, the most important thing that our church does all year long is these 4 weeks. We come together as all the volunteers who serve at our church and people who are thinking about getting involved. All of you are invited on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock over here in the in the education building right behind us. It's not the type of training that you've ever been to. If you've been before, you know that it's very different from that. We have a lot of fun, but there's almost nothing more important than the next few weeks of us trying to learn how and talking about and training how do we love others like Jesus is talking about here. We're going to worship together, and we are going to talk about all the ways to love other people better. And get used to it, because as long as I'm here, we're going to be talking forever about how to love other people, because that's why the church is here.